Nahash, Steelshod. Alexander identifies himself to the Ruskan outriders, immediately changing the tone of the conversation. They are Kerensky men, and he is a Kerensky after all. They escort Steelshod north to the main host of the Ruskan army. Bayard Kerensky, Alexander learns, has been appointed commander of the Ruskan foragers and scouts. Not totally surprising, since the Kerensky lands are largely wilderness, on the inhospitable northeastern edge of the civilized lands, and Alexander's father, Valentin, distinguished himself hunting barbarians on the eastern steppes in his youth. Along the way, however, Alexander learns that his father died last winter. Alexander has only been away from home for about 6 years, since he turned 18, so this is not exactly a shock, but still unhappy news. Thus, the Bayard Kerensky they are taking him to is not his father, but rather his eldest brother, Artyom. Tragic news, but more relevant for Nahash's prospects, also bad news on another front. Valentin held Alexander in high esteem, despite his lower status as the third son. By contrast, Artyom had never much liked his little brother, a fact that was only exacerbated when Valentin violated tradition and bequeathed the family sword to Alexander, instead of leaving it as part of Artyom's inheritance. The army comes into view after a while. It's fairly late in the day, and the column has already begun setting up camp. Even so, the size of the sprawl of men is daunting. Rusk is huge, and, at least by numbers, few powers can field an army like the Ruskans. Thousands upon thousands of men. Alexander asks his escort to take him straight to the commander of the Ruskin forces. He notes some of the banners flying over the assembled troops. The highest banner, the general of the army, is, thankfully, not the Tsar. Alexander does not know him well, but by reputation, Tsar Nikolai is a difficult and capricious man at the best of times. Instead, it appears the man that has been appointed to command is a man named Grigory Sokolov. Sokolov is a high bayard, commanding a huge swath of western Rusk. Alexander has never met him, but he is known to be a wise and shrewd ruler, managing much of the Ruskin farming heartland. He's led several successful wars against the Kragars, Dunridge, and especially the rebel bayards that regularly pop up along the borders of the Ruskin territories. He also sees the banner of House Polzin, likely Radoslav Polzin, a lesser lord of Sokolov's and one of Sokolov's closest friends and mentors. Polzin is a renowned strategist and tactician, some say the architect of most of Sokolov's military successes. Neither of them are unreasonable men, so maybe this is a good sign. On the other hand, Alexander sees a number of other banners as well. Other high bayards that may be a little less reasonable than Sokolov and Polzin. Most notable of these are Houses Orlov and Krupin. House Orlov is expansive, with dozens of offshoot families. Last Alexander knew, the patriarch was a man named Matvey. Matvey Orlov was ancient 5 years ago, the last Alexander heard he still lived. An old man well past the point of caring about civility or his own life, dignity, or comfort. A man totally devoted to ensuring that House Orlov was as well placed as possible, and his heirs positioned to expand their power and influence. The epitome of a man that has become so old he has no fucks left to give, basically. The other one, Yosef Krupin, is another high bayard. His fiefdoms are located along the Barrier Mountains, the southern border between Rusk and Tarathia, or more technically, the border between Rusk and the independent kingdoms in northern Tarathia, notably Acton. Yosef has a long history of border skirmishes with Acton and any other Tarathians that take his bait. He is a warrior, a glory hound, and an obstinate bastard. Alexander knows not just by reputation. He worked briefly for a lesser Krupin noble, when he was still trying to find his way in the world. Alexander and Steelshod are ushered to a large pavilion and made to wait. Eventually, Alexander is summoned alone. He asks that he be allowed to bring his second, Yorin, and they accept. Inside, Sokolov is conducting a war council of sorts. Alexander notes a number of lesser and greater bayards and the familiar high lords. Sokolov, Polzin, Krupin, Orlov, It seems unjust that Alexander's father had died while the much older Matvey still lives, and yes, he sees Artyom Kerensky. Alexander greets them, and Artyom watches him with cold, calculating eyes. Artyom comments on their good fortune, that Alexander has his men already positioned inside Nahash. It should be much easier to take the city that way after all. Polzin and Sokolov agree, commending Alexander for his service to the motherland. Alexander quickly cuts off this line of thinking. Steelshod's contract has been paid by the Council of Nahash, Alexander says, his voice as hard as steel. As a matter of honor, we would not break it. We will serve the city until the siege is over, one way or another. The bayards are upset by this. Lots of harumphing occurs. This means Alexander is an enemy of the army, of Rusk itself. Yoren doesn't like where this is headed. He discreetly prepares a black cloud in the event that they need to escape. He mentally notes the positions of the nearest important bayards that aren't Alexander's kin, so that he can kill them once the smoke obscures the room. It doesn't occur to him how far he's come, that he now calmly stands in a room with a dozen great lords in the heart of an enemy camp, planning whether or not he'll need to pull off a hot escape under enemy fire. Alexander points out that, right now, Nahash's battle is with the Sfards. He was not contracted to defend all of Tarathia from the depredations of its neighbors, however distasteful he may find this backstabbing by his countrymen, and he openly tells him that he finds it fairly despicable. He is not specifically going to stop them from doing it. They only become his enemies if they arrive at Nahash and lay siege to the city in league with the Sfards. Which they are going to do very soon, Sokolov points out. That is precisely what I have come to discuss, Alexander says. The Tsar sent you here, presumably, to grab as much land as possible, not because he has some hatred of the people in Nahash or love of the Sephardic barbarians. Obviously true, Sokolov nods, as do some of the other bayards. Fighting at Nahash will not further any of those goals, Alexander says. In fact, it would jeopardize everything. Alexander begins to weave a scenario for them. First, there's the siege. Allied with savages under the most bloodthirsty barbarian jarl ever to live. Trying to crush the heart of the church, what kind of noble goal is that? Tarathi Ruskins are not the majority, but they're common. Easily half to a quarter of the Ruskan population is of the faith, including the Tsar's personal vizier. They would be fighting against the faithful of Torath for the heart of their religion, a desperate fight that eventually would come down to every last Tarathian man, woman, and child. The Sfards and Ruskins outnumber the Nahash defenders heavily, but they don't outnumber the civilians by nearly as much, and sooner or later, Terbjonson's savage goal will force the civilians into conflict. They would also face the remaining Serpentes, a fighting force of near-mythic standing, led by Brother Enoch, less famous than Kishar in the south perhaps, but Rusk knows Enoch very, very well, and knew him even better when he was still King Saul of Acton, the White Devil, the man that orchestrated the Vtavgorod massacre, the general that killed Bayard Yosef Krupin's father in single combat. And that is to say nothing of Steelshod. They have fought Terbjonson and the Sfards to a standstill time and time again, and they would be no less a thorn in Sokolov's side. Alexander calmly tells them that, though he loves and honors his family, and he personally will not fight against the Ruskins, he will tell his men to fight their hardest. And if it comes to that, they will not spare even Artyom. Alexander will shed tears over it, but he will stay faithful to his word as it was given to Nahash, as any good, dutiful Ruskin would. Compared to Enoch, Steelshod draws some scoffs. A few of them have heard some of the stories that have begun to spread, but Steelshod's fame has not yet penetrated deeply into the Ruskin consciousness. Alexander takes a gamble, a show of strength. He points out that every word they say about Yoren, the Black Magician, is true. He is no less dangerous than the Tsar's vizier, and even now he has no doubt considered how many of them he would leave dead on the ground should this discussion break down. Sokolov's having none of that. Neither is Krupin, who stands up at the threatening words. Sokolov tells the guard near the tent opening to seize Yoren. When the guard gets close, Yoren uses a new trick Hubert cooked up. The Sunburst formula, solidified into a dusty paste, stable unless impacted. Yoren dips his fingers into the pouch of the stuff in his bandolier, snaps his fingers in the guard's face, creating a small but nevertheless brilliant flash of light. The guard is blinded, and when his vision clears, he finds that Yoren has gently pressed the tip of a steel dagger to his throat. Kruppen draws his own weapon, and Alexander's sword comes free of its sheath as well. Kruppen advances on Yoren. Alexander interposes his blade in a cautioning gesture. Too awkward to be threatening, he just makes the sword a barrier. He asks Kruppen and everyone else to settle down. He again stresses that he has no intention of fighting them unless they force his hand, though Yoren perhaps has a lower threshold. But they were making a point, not attacking. Artyom, from where he sits, suddenly speaks. His voice is cold and furious. He demands Alexander explain what the fuck he has done to his father's sword. Alexander sighs. He tells Artyom that the blade was corrupted by Thaumaty magic and eventually reforged from the heart of a fallen star. It sounds ridiculous, like just another boast, but the sword gleams so brightly, clearly steel of a type none present have ever seen before. Alexander asks Artyom to come closer and see it for himself. Artyom does so, and this effectively diffuses the tension. The guard backs off, Yoren sheathes his dagger, Kruppen sits back down. Artyom grudgingly admits that the repairs made to the sword look to be well done, and maybe it really is fallen star metal. Quietly, Artyom tells Alexander that their middle brother is present in the army as well. Vasily Kerensky, a personal druzhnik of the Tsar's, has been attached to Bayard Sokolov's honor guard, just so that Alexander knows the stake if the Ruskins come to blows with Steelshod. Alexander makes one final plea to the Bayards. Terbjornsson is not a stable or sane man. He cannot be trusted. He will use them and turn on them when the time suits him. Alexander isn't even asking them to switch sides, just to stand down. They can come to Nahash, set up camp, and wait. If Terbjornsson takes the city, they can fight him for spoils, or help him defeat the huge army of Serpentes that Brother Kashar will eventually bring back for another bout of bloody revenge. Or flee. But if he doesn't take the city, if they let him fight alone and Nahash prevails, they will be well situated to negotiate. Why conquer Nahash? Better to use their presence as a huge, threatening army to force favorable terms, make Nahash concede the lands they have taken, legitimize this land grab so that they do not have to contend with the inevitable retaliations. Not just from Kashar, wiping out Nahash will, sooner or later, bring down the wrath of every Tarathi in the world. Lorenet, Midish, Spitalian, Kasseline, Hassadian, a holy war that Rusk does not want and may well lose. Alexander's words are well spoken, and it helps that they are true. Terbjornsson can't win his war, not forever, and he knows it. That's fine by him. He's a broken man looking forward to bloody revenge and death. But the Tsar and his bayards are shrewd, far too smart to get sucked into this foolishness. Sokolov and Polzin confer quietly, and they agree. They will march on Nahash, but they will not engage. Not initially, anyway, not unless Terbjornsson can give them a damn good reason. Good enough for now. Alexander has no intention on spending the night in the Ruskin camp. He thanks them for their understanding, says his goodbyes, and he and Yoren are back in the saddle headed south by the time the sun sets. Thank you for tuning in to Steelshod, a series by Mostly Rights, narrated by Tailforge. You can find every chapter in text format, as well as character sheets, setting information, maps, and rule documents on the Steelshod tabletop system in the link below. If you'd like to support the channel, you can pop down to the description and use the Patreon link for recurring donations, the paypal.me link for one-time donations, the Teespring link for shirts with the incredibly cool background art by Nobody, or Use the DriveThruRPG affiliate link the next time you're looking to try a new system. If you'd like to support the author, you can find Steelshod merch on the mostlyrights.com store, or donate to the Mostly Rights Patreon, which are both linked on reddit.com/r/mostlyrights down below.